There is a moment in the day when silence becomes unbearable. It can be in the elevator, in traffic, or in those seconds before falling asleep when the mind finally stops. That's when we realize that something inside us stirs, twists, demands movement. The hand automatically reaches for the cell phone. The fingers slide across the screen. Anything to fill the void that arises when we are alone with ourselves. This restlessness is not accidental. It reveals something disturbing about what we have become. We have developed a silent allergy to our own company. Loneliness is no longer a space for inner reflection, but a threatening territory populated by thoughts we prefer not to hear and feelings we choose not to feel. When did we start to fear our own minds? When did the inner voice become something we run away from? There is a silent epidemic, the inability to inhabit our own thoughts without needing external stimuli to calm us, distract us, validate us. Notice how many times during the day our mind is truly alone. How many minutes can we sustain a reflection without seeking external confirmation? The answer is frightening. Almost none. We live in a state of constant flight from our own consciousness, as if it were too dangerous a place to inhabit. Freud observed this phenomenon over a century ago, but his words echo today with almost prophetic accuracy. He realized that modern individuals were losing something fundamental, the ability to sustain their own psychic existence without dissolving into the collective. What he could not have imagined is how this dissolution would become not only possible, but inevitable. Today, escaping from oneself requires neither crowds nor charismatic leaders. All it takes is a cell phone. All it takes is a timeline. All it takes is the promise that somewhere on the internet, there is someone thinking for us, feeling for us, deciding for us. And so, without realizing it, we surrender our inner lives in exchange for the relief of not having to inhabit them. But the price of this surrender is devastating. We lose the ability to sustain an uncomfortable idea until it becomes insight. We no longer tolerate the creative tension that arises from boredom. We abandon the psychic work necessary to discover who we really are when no one is looking. Inner loneliness, which should be our existential laboratory, has become something we avoid at all costs. And in this escape, we have lost not only the ability to think, but something even more precious, the possibility of finding ourselves. What if this restlessness we feel in silence is not a defect to be corrected, but a sign that we have lost something essential? What if the inability to be alone with our own thoughts is a symptom of a disease much deeper than we imagine? What if discovering this is the first step to recovering our own soul? Freud called mass psychology something that today happens inside your living room, in the privacy of your bedroom, in the solitude of your commute to work. We no longer need to be physically in a crowd to experience the dissolution of the self that he described with surgical precision. The masses now fit in our pockets. In 1921, when he wrote Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, Freud observed that individuals, when they join a group, abandon their uniqueness, their ideals, their moral restraints, and acquire a feeling of invincible strength. This abandonment did not happen out of weakness, but out of a deep psychological relief. The crowd offered protection against the anguish of existing as a unique being, responsible for one's own choices. What Freud did not foresee is that this mass would become virtual, algorithmic, available 24 hours a day. Today, dissolution happens the moment we open the first app. You don't have to leave your home to give up your own thoughts. Just swipe your finger across the screen and let others decide what is important, what is true, what deserves your attention. Observe your own mind in the first few minutes after waking up. How many times does it remain silent, inhabited by your own questions? Or is it almost immediately hijacked by notifications, headlines, and other people's opinions that infiltrate your mind as if they were your own thoughts? This infiltration is subtle but devastating. What Freud called emotional contagion now happens through algorithms designed to capture and redirect our attention. We no longer think, we react. We no longer choose, we follow. Our mind becomes an echo of the loudest voices, the most shocking images, the most extreme emotions. The Freudian masses had a visible leader. The digital masses have thousands of micro-leaders, influencers, commentators, profiles we follow without questioning why their opinions matter more than ours. Each like is a vote of confidence in an external voice. Each share is a renunciation of personal critical filter. But there is something even more disturbing about this dynamic. Freud realized that in the crowd, the individual depersonalizes himself and becomes, so to speak, hypnotized. Today, this hypnosis is literal. Studies show that social media use activates the same reward centers in the brain as addictive substances. It is no coincidence that we feel glazed when looking at a screen. The difference is that substance addiction affects the body. Addiction to external stimuli affects something deeper, our ability to generate autonomous thought. We begin to feel that our mind without external input is empty, tedious, insufficient. Solitude becomes torture. Imagine a child who has never learned to play alone. They become dependent on constant stimuli to avoid despair. This is exactly what has happened to our mental life. We have lost the ability to entertain ourselves with our own thoughts, to find pleasure in contemplation, to sustain a reflection until it matures into understanding. There is a phenomenon that psychologists call fear of mental emptiness. It is the feeling of panic that some people experience when they are alone with their thoughts for more than a few minutes. This fear did not exist before social media. It is a direct product of the constant outsourcing of our inner lives. Freud warned that, in the masses, feelings of individual responsibility disappear. Today, this manifests itself in a more subtle way. We do not take responsibility for our own thoughts because there is no longer a clear boundary between what we think and what we consume. Our inner life becomes a collage of fragments belonging to others. Worse still, we begin to believe that this collage is our identity. We confuse the opinions we like with our convictions. We mix the feelings we make viral with our real emotions. And when we try to find our authentic voice, we discover that it has been buried under layers of digital noise. The cruelest consequence of this dissolution is the loss of the ability to create. Creativity requires mental solitude, time for internal maturation, tolerance for the emptiness that precedes all genuine discovery. When we externalize our psychic life, we kill the source from which everything that is truly ours is born. Freud observed that the masses substitute for the individual the lost object of love. In the digital world, that object of love is not a person or an ideal, but our own capacity for independent thought. We surrender our mental autonomy in exchange for the comfort of never having to face the silence of our own consciousness. And so gradually we lose the most fundamental human capacity, to be alone with ourselves without despair. What should be the most intimate and creative space of existence becomes a void that must be constantly filled by voices that are not our own. But this escape from inner loneliness has an even deeper and more disturbing motivation. There is an image that perfectly symbolizes our time. A 40-year-old woman feeding a hyper-realistic doll as if it were her child. She buys clothes for it, takes it to the doctor, talks to it as if it could respond. At first glance, it seems crazy, but look closer and you will see something much more disturbing. The perfect materialization of our most secret desire. The reborn doll represents the ideal love of our time. A love that never disappoints, never protests, never demands growth. It is the fantasy of a bond that offers all the emotional gratification without any of the risks that make love truly human. Freud realized that the mass substitutes for the lost love object. In the case of silicone babies, the lost object is not a specific person, but something more fundamental, our ability to love without control. Because to truly love means accepting that the other person can frustrate us, surprise us, force us to grow in ways we did not plan. These dolls are not a symptom of emotional deprivation. They are a symptom of something much more serious, the refusal of otherness, the inability to tolerate that the other is truly another, with desires that do not coincide with ours, needs that bother us, reactions that we cannot predict. Look at your own relationships. How many times have you been annoyed because someone did not exactly meet your emotional expectations? How many friendships have been discarded because the person changed? How many times have you tried to mold someone else to fit into the space you had reserved for them in your life? There is a subtle cruelty in the way we treat those close to us. We expect them to be consistent with the version we have created of them in our minds. When they dare to be different, we feel betrayed, as if they had broken a contract they never signed, to remain eternally the same for our comfort. The doll you criticize is present on a smaller scale every time you prefer a text message to a face-to-face conversation, every time you choose a like over a hug, every time you replace the complexity of a real relationship with the simplicity of a digital connection that can be paused, edited, deleted. Social media is in fact a sophisticated version of reborn babies. It offers us people reduced to profiles, relationships condensed into controllable interactions, affections that we can turn on and off at our convenience. And just like the woman who feeds her doll, we believe we are experiencing real connections. Freud warned that mass love is a form of inverted narcissism. We love the other only as long as they confirm the image we have of ourselves. This perfectly describes our era. We follow people who think like us, date through algorithms that present us with compatibilities, and build social bubbles where everyone echoes our own opinions. The result is an entire generation that confuses affinity with love, compatibility with intimacy, validation with affection. We have lost the ability to love through differences, to find beauty in what challenges us, to grow through the friction that every true relationship inevitably produces. But there is something even more disturbing about this dynamic. When we eliminate the risk of love, we also eliminate its transformative power. True love forces us to step outside ourselves, to question our certainties, to discover aspects of ourselves that only emerge in contact with the unpredictability of another. The doll teaches us nothing about ourselves that we didn't already know. It merely confirms our fantasy that we are capable of love. But loving an object that cannot disappoint us is not love. It is emotional masturbation. Think about the last time you were genuinely surprised by someone close to you. Not a planned surprise, but that moment when the person showed you a side you didn't know, said something you didn't expect, reacted in a way that completely escaped your prediction. That moment of surprise is where real love happens. It is when we realize that the other is not an extension of ourselves, but a universe unto themselves. Reborn babies eliminate this possibility. They are the promise of a relationship without surprises, without growth, without the creative tension that arises from the encounter between two distinct subjectivities. It is love reduced to a vegetative state, safe, predictable, dead. If you've come this far, it's because something inside you recognizes this uncomfortable truth. It's because even if you don't admit it, you know that something essential has been lost in the way we relate to each other. And maybe it's time to stop running away from that realization. The question no one wants to ask is, what happens when an entire generation grows up believing that love is control, that intimacy is compatibility, that relating to someone is consuming them? What happens when we lose the courage to love without guarantees? The answer is closer than we think. It lies in the way you relate to yourself, in the way you deal with frustration, in the way you react when others don't live up to your expectations. It lies in your growing inability to tolerate conflict, to sustain tension, to love through imperfection. There is a moment in every child's life when they stop imitating their parents and begin to discover themselves. That is when individuality is born, when something unique that did not exist before emerges. But what if that moment never came? What if instead of growing up, the child continued forever copying, reproducing, echoing voices that are not their own? This is exactly what Freud described as pathological identification. And this is exactly what has become the norm in our time. Freud wrote that identification is known in psychoanalysis as the most primitive form of emotional attachment to another person. Primitive in the sense of archaic, prior to elaborate thought, prior to the capacity for discernment. It is as if in identifying ourselves we regress to a childlike state where we do not yet know where we end and where the other begins. On social media, this regression happens on an industrial scale. We no longer choose influences. We are influenced. We do not select content. We are selected by algorithms that know our desires better than we do. And so gradually, our personality becomes a collage of fragments belonging to others that we believe to be our own. Look at your own timeline. How many of the opinions you share were truly born out of personal reflection? How many times have you liked something not because you agreed with it, but because you saw that other people were liking it? How many of your beliefs are just echoes of voices you admire? Digital identification is even more dangerous than traditional identification because it is invisible. When a child imitates their father, they know they are imitating. When we like a post, we believe we are expressing our authentic opinion. The boundary between influence and autonomy dissolves. Freud realized that the individual renounces his ego ideal and replaces it with the common ideal of the masses. In the digital world, this common ideal is not an ideology or a leader, but an algorithm. It is not a person we admire, but a pattern of behavior that is constantly suggested to us. The most disturbing thing is that this pattern adapts to us. We don't have to fit into a specific group. The group itself molds itself to our apparent tastes, creating a personalized bubble that gives us the illusion of being ourselves when in fact we are being shaped by an external logic. This is the perfect prison. A tailor-made cage decorated to our tastes, populated by people who think like us. We don't feel claustrophobic because the prison looks like freedom. We don't notice the bars because they are invisible. Think about the last time you had a truly original idea. Not an opinion you adapted from someone else. Not a reaction you saw somewhere else. But a thought that sprang genuinely from your unique experience. Can you remember? Or has it been so long that you can no longer distinguish between what is yours and what is borrowed? Freud warned that the stronger the identification with the group, the more individuality disappears. Today, this identification does not happen with a group, but with a network. A network that connects millions of people who will never meet, but who think in surprisingly similar ways. That is why, despite all the diversity of social media, we find the same patterns of thought, the same emotional reactions, the same indignation repeating themselves on a global scale. This is no coincidence. It is the result of mass identification with the same algorithmic stimuli. The real tragedy of digital identification is that it kills the possibility of the unexpected. When our minds become predictable to an algorithm, when our reactions can be anticipated by a machine, we lose what makes us human, the ability to surprise ourselves. Imagine you could see a graph of all your online behavior over the past 6 months. Your likes, shares, comments, time spent on each type of content. What you would see is a frighteningly consistent pattern. Not because you are a consistent person, but because you have been algorithmically shaped to be predictable. Freud observed that identification appears in place of the lost object. The lost object of our time is not a person or an ideal, but our own capacity for original thought. We have surrendered our uniqueness in exchange for the comfort of belonging, without realizing that what we think of as belonging is merely algorithmic conformity. And so we live the illusion of connected individuality. We believe we are unique because our bubbles are personalized, without realizing that personalization follows universal patterns. We feel special because the algorithm understands us, without realizing that being understood by a machine means becoming as predictable as one. But perhaps the cruelest thing is this: we have lost the ability to surprise ourselves, to think something we have never thought before, to feel something that escapes the norm. Our mind becomes a sophisticated echo, but it remains an echo nonetheless. And when we try to find our authentic voice, we discover that it has been buried under so many layers of influence that we no longer even know if it still exists. There is a silence that few know. It is the silence that arises when all external voices fall silent and we are left alone with the vastness of our own minds. It is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of fullness. The silence of those who have finally stopped running away from themselves. Freud knew that reaching this place requires courage. Because thinking alone, truly alone, means accepting that most of our certainties are borrowed, that much of what we call personality is just a compilation of influences, that what we believe to be our authentic voice may be just a sophisticated echo. When you sit in total silence, no music, no cell phone, nothing to distract you from your own presence, what do you find? At first, there is an almost unbearable restlessness. The mind races, looking for anything to occupy itself, inventing urgent problems that need immediate solutions. It is the escape system going into panic mode. But if you resist, if you endure that first wave of discomfort, something extraordinary happens. The restlessness subsides. The compulsive thoughts diminish. And for the first time in a long time, you hear your own inner voice. Not the one that repeats other people's opinions, but the one that arises genuinely from your unique experience. Freud called this psychic work. It is the process by which the mind processes, elaborates, and transforms raw experiences into genuine understanding. But this work can only happen in solitude. It requires time, quiet, and the courage to stay with what is uncomfortable until it becomes insight. The digital society has robbed us of this time, not because we don't have free minutes, but because we have lost the tolerance for the emptiness that precedes all authentic creation. We want immediate answers, instant relief, constant validation. And so we systematically interrupt the process by which we become who we really are. There is a profound difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone is a circumstance. Being lonely is a state of consciousness. It is possible to be alone and still run away from yourself through distractions. But being truly alone requires total presence, acceptance of what arises, and the courage to inhabit your own experience without editing it. Those who can sustain this inner solitude discover something paradoxical. The deeper they know themselves, the more genuinely they can connect with others. Because only those who have their own voice can offer something real in a conversation. Only those who have endured their own abysses can accompany someone else in theirs. But there is a price to pay for this awareness. When you stop echoing the opinions of the masses, when you develop your own thoughts, when you refuse to participate in collective delusions, you inevitably become a stranger. Not because you chose to isolate yourself, but because you chose to find yourself. Freud knew that the fear of being excluded from the masses is often more powerful than any moral impulse. That is why most people prefer the illusion of belonging to the truth of conscious solitude. It is easier to be part of a herd than to think for oneself. It is more comfortable to echo than to create. But for those who make the more difficult choice, who accept the price of solitary consciousness, there is an invaluable reward: the recovery of one's own soul. Not the romantic soul of poets, but the concrete soul of those who can sustain their own thoughts, feel their own emotions, make their own decisions. When you finally manage to be alone with yourself without despair, when your own company becomes not just tolerable but enjoyable, when you discover that your mind is fertile territory and not a haunted desert, then something fundamental is restored. You cease to be a puppet of external influences and become finally a human being. The path back to yourself is not easy. It requires you to turn off your cell phone when anxiety strikes, to sit in silence when your mind screams for stimulation, to stay with your own thoughts when they become uncomfortable, that you choose creative solitude over compulsive connection. It is a slow process, sometimes painful, always transformative. Because in the end, Discovering who you are when no one is watching, when no algorithm is influencing you, when no outside voice is guiding you, is the only adventure truly worth having. In the silence of our own consciousness, far from the noise of the masses, we are truly born to ourselves. When did you realize that you had lost your own voice among so many others? Write in the comments. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos. You reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the codes of the White Rabbit are ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.